Glad to have you. This is being recorded, obviously. Looking forward to this exciting topic we have today. Mardell Shepley will be introducing our speakers and the topic. Just let everybody know this is an ACHA sponsored event. You will get health, safety, and welfare credit for this. And if you want any more information about the American College of Healthcare Architects, we can put that link in the chat. We're happy to help and get you hooked up to become a new certificate holder. With that, Mardell, thank you to Mardell for moderating this, and also to our committee for doing a fantastic job on putting this session together. With that, Mardell, you're up.
All right, thank you, Anne. I also wanted to add that we arranged to get EDAC credit for this as well. So if you're one of those who is trying to collect your credits for EDAC, that's also an option. I am just trying to give you an overview of what we were trying to achieve here. And as I've been describing to people, this is really a post-occupancy evaluation of evidence-based design. So we are, rather than saying we're for research or against research, it's really about talking about what the successes were and what things we have not yet been able to achieve or maybe have in progress. So it won't be a formal debate pattern, but you'll see people they've been assigned to take strong positions one way or the other. Kirk Hamilton, who is, he's one of those people who goes without needing an introduction. He has agreed to be the moderator for this, and he will be working with providing the questions that we've already invented, and then he will give people that want to respond to those questions the opportunity to do so. So, Kirk?
Thank you, Mardell. What a great opportunity this is. This is a chance for us to talk about what research has contributed to the field of healthcare design. And we have today 4 of the most prominent researchers and people who write about, read about, talk about research in healthcare design as a panel. So it's an enormous pleasure. I'm not going to go into all the details about everybody's background and their college degrees and all of that. Dr. Ellen Taylor with the Center for Health Design, Dr. Upali Nanda, who I think is working both at firms and with the University of Michigan. Terry Zabrowski, doctor also, who has long worked with HGA and a firm and is associated with universities. And Jennifer Aliber, who may be our really true practitioner of the group with Shepley Bullfinch, but Jennifer has had a long track record associated with research as well. The question for today is whether or not the prospect of design research, especially design research associated with the health arena, has in fact lived up to its potential. The question is going to be whether or not we've achieved anything like what we had hoped to achieve, whether we're about to achieve whatever it is that we hope, and so on. And we have really 4 wonderful voices to explore this idea. So the first question for everyone, in no particular order, is to what degree has healthcare facility design benefited from design research? Who wants to tackle that first?
I'll jump right in. Thanks for the question. It's a really good one. I just want to say that I think when we just even introduce this topic, as we talk about evidence-based design or design research in healthcare facilities, that by doing that, we really elevate the thought processes that go on in throughout the design process. And as a result of that, I think everybody gains from the rigorous nature in which we start to think, and we start to think about how does design impact outcomes. And that is from the staff, family, patient, all users experience. But we're seeing a new trend too, which I also want to talk about. So I think it's benefited our thought process and our design processes. and it's to a varying degree, of course, because everybody has different experiences with it. But I'm starting to, I just was asked to be part of a panel talking to some students who are in public health, talking about the impact of design on social determinants of health. So we're starting to question things. People are starting to want to know more. And so I do believe that that health facility design has benefited from design research, even if we're just starting to cross over some of those thought processes.
Good point. And you're mentioning the sort of cross-discipline nature. Before we were doing all this, it was pretty much architects talking to architects. Now we talk to lots of people from different disciplines. Who else wants to comment on the?
I'll go ahead and jump in. So I'm assigned the con view. I am clearly supportive of evidence-based design and research and design, but I think there is more that we can do. So from this perspective, I agree. It's a great question to start off with. I think there's been a huge benefit by using an evidence-based design process, and we've been better able to help people understand it's not just I like this. There's reasons for the things that we do. And back when I was in practice, I remember, well, the CEO's wife likes purple, so that's what we're going to do. And I'm just so happy that we have more of a leg to stand on with some of the decision making. That said, one of the initial goals of the evidence-based design process was really to fully engage teams, not just the architects and designers taking the lead on this. So I think there's a lot of times where maybe our healthcare stakeholders aren't very well prepared for their role and just assume that the architect is taking care of it. And I think we can all agree it takes a great client to make a great project. So clients being an active part of both using the research and understanding the research and potentially creating research is essential. And I think for anybody who knows me, you know my passion for the business case. And I think we still fall short a little bit on that side. So we're good about talking about how we can improve outcomes and do great things through design. We don't often have an opportunity to assign dollars to that, and dollars talk and dollars mean things on the owner's side. So I think if we could progress to that next step of really incorporating that, going back to the old Fable Hospital project of 20 years ago, that could be something more that we could achieve.
Good points. That the very idea that the research allows us to have a justification for what we're doing. I can recall being a young designer thinking that I was rational about my decisions, but I really had no ammunition. And it was Roger Ulrich's 1984 paper about the view from the window that blew my mind and caused me to, change my whole career from then on, and wanting to understand that outcome. Good points, Ellen. Who else? Upali, are you ready?
I was ceding my role in the queue to Jennifer as a practitioner on that. But yeah, I think you asked the question, right, that have healthcare facilities benefited from design research? And I would say more than we think, but less than we need. And significantly less than we need, because our portfolios don't look different. The design artifacts that come out of it don't look different. The amount we get paid is not looking significantly different. We are not seeing a requirement. It should be in the RFP that I want to know the why behind your decisions, and I want that why to be informed. And so I genuinely feel that, yeah, we have fallen short because we've made a lot of strides in the design research. We have benefited, but not as much as we needed to benefit, given the stakes that are here at play in healthcare. And
I understand. I love the no difference in the artifacts. Yes, projects are claiming evidence-based elements and outcomes and so on, but they sure do look similar to the projects that went before, don't they? interesting point. Jennifer, how about you? What's the practice side of this?
Well, I was assigned a pro, and I really do want to be a pro, but I really struggle because I struggle as a practitioner. I'll just get to the end point. I find it impossible to find the research I want when I want it. I'm not in a big enough firm that we have researchers. Sure, I'm senior enough I could assign somebody to do it if I could find somebody who wanted to do it and has the time to do it. Usually I want them to do something else because there's the deadline on tomorrow. But I really want there to be more research, and I want it to be much, much more accessible to the rest of us who don't have a research entity within our firms. We don't share. I know firms who do have that say, oh, we do. But as one of my colleagues who came to us from a large firm said, yeah, they shared. They shared the little itty bitty stuff that no one cared about. They didn't share the good stuff. So that, that's a frustration. It's not a comment on the quality or the importance of the research. So, but there needs to be more. I'm an impatient person. Feel like we've been talking about this for 20 years and it still feels like slogging through quicksand or mud or something.
Now, that's a fascinating perspective, Jennifer. I know I was once frustrated. I suppose I still am. But when I got to the university as a former practitioner and discovered that you can go to these libraries and you have access to everything that you could possibly want, I had proposed that the AIA, since it wanted to be research-based, should act like a university library and should buy access to all of that information. So practitioners everywhere could have access. They chose not to do that. So ever since then, my advice has been for firms to always have a graduate student working for them who had access to a university library. Anyway, I sympathize for your anxiety over not being able to get what you need at the time that you need it and so on. Sometimes there's something really fabulous that's very helpful. It's just not helpful on the project that you're working on and what you need right now to help your client in the most effective way that you can. Interesting thoughts. One of the other questions, I must say, Mardell has sort of prompted us with a lot of this sort of stuff. And one of the questions she's encouraged us to think about is whether or not researchers focus too much on the publishing and the academic side rather than serving as thought leaders or otherwise helping the field. Any thoughts on that? I know, Upali, you do an awful lot of publications. You are one who might fit the profile of somebody who publishes a lot, but you also practice. How's that working?
Well, my journal publication rate has definitely gone down. So I think and I'm going to cite my colleague, Dr. Deborah Wingler here, that part of what you learn about being in practice, to Jennifer's earlier point, is you need a lot more flexible and scalable approach.
Yeah.
You have to have flexibility and scalability and understand what's the right level of evidence for the question in front of me. What do I really need? And some questions are so contextual that a clear answer doesn't live in a journal article. It has to be contextually discovered. So part of that balance, like, can academic researchers be too mired in publication? I say yes, but they should be. I hope they are. I hope they continue to be, because practice-based researchers may not have the ability to go that deep. And certainly members of our team publish in journals and publish in mainstream media. But I really believe we need more coalitions. We cannot compete on knowledge. It doesn't make sense to compete on knowledge. We should compete on the application of knowledge. And I do believe that that's happening now. And with the advent of AI, it would be stupid to compete on knowledge in any case, because next thing we know, the machine will be smarter than us and we are all irrelevant. So I think there is an inflection point. I do believe that this practice versus academia debate, that's an old one now. I think we've bridged it significantly. I think there are a lot more, there are human bridges. There is a lot of posture from academia to reach out. There's a lot of posture from industry to reach out. What we don't have is an agile network where someone like Jennifer can say, here's my question, and whether it's an academic resource or an industry resource or someone else can, or the center as a nonprofit that's sitting there that can come in and say, oh, I think we know where you can go. I think we need networks. I think we have the pieces.
So it's fascinating. You mentioned that your productivity as a publisher has gone down as you've entered
in
more
peer-reviewed publications, yes.
in practice. And I think that's an interesting issue that is being balanced, at least in part, that we have people who are now being able to come out of their PhD programs and go into practice instead of only being able to go into academia. I once met a guy in Virginia after giving a presentation to the AIA about evidence-based design, and the guy came up and mentioned that he had a PhD. He had studied under Mardell Shepley, by golly, and that he was so glad to hear that evidence-based design was now in the forefront. He was going to then, in the future, put his PhD on his business card. He had previously been afraid to let the world know that he had a PhD because he would have been rejected in the practice world. And I think that's fading away, I believe. It's no longer the death knell of being hired by a real firm. But I think the question of networking is an important one. And Ellen, I think you, in your role with the Center for Health Design, have perhaps something to say in response to Upali's comments.
Yeah, so I think, the center over the decades that it's been around has really tried to create community and create tools and resources. And I'm sure we could have an entire conversation about how that works and what the real, needs and desires are. Jennifer, I think you bring up a good point that, it's I need this now, not that then. So I think there's always a challenge there. I think, Upali's point about publishing in academia being different than the incentivization that exists when you're in practice is a real one. I mean, if you're an academic and you're seeking tenure, you're definitely under pressure to publish. That's just part of how the process works right now. There's also the question of what type of research is produced. So Polly is talking about the very practical world of things, and not everything has to have an empirical research project. It doesn't have to be studied in the same way. Part of the challenge is, what is the purpose of the research? So look at PhD students. They're not getting the Nobel Prize. They're not trying to come up with the answer about something. They're learning to do research. So there's training the people, there's training the next generation and what that research does. And then there's big fancy research, big R research, where we do have opportunities to really look at things in a very rigorous way. And then there's that stuff where maybe it's a lighter lift. Maybe there's other ways of looking at it. And with the advent of big data, Upali, I know you've been talking about this for years, there's other ways to potentially generate evidence than the traditional way that we've been looking at things. So I think there's lots of opportunities going forward. And, we have the Built Environment Network, the Pediatric Environment Network, a Behavioral Health Network, and they're really great at being able to share what's happening in their world and point people to resources. So it's starting. We're getting there.
I want to jump in this discussion too. I completely agree with Polly. I don't have time to do peer review, very little time to do peer-reviewed publications. I totally understand that. And I've moved away from that in some ways. So there is a time and a place for everything. Right now, my focus is on really the practice-based research and trying to get others engaged in the practice of research and moving research into the design process, if you will. Part of what I think we're all struggling with is because We don't really, there are a few programs that really teach this at that first degree level, or introduce the idea of research, in an educational setting. So then it's hard to expect people to utilize tools that they're not necessarily really familiar with, right? So that is, I think that's something that will change over time. Had I actually been able to choose a side, I would have been pro, because I do believe that this will change over time. I think this is a movement, just like a lot of other movements, that just needs time and acceleration in order for it to be successful. So thought leaders as catalysts, as action catalysts, I think, again, I will come back to my very, very simple comment. Even talking about it makes you be more thoughtful about it. Then you may do something different. You may not do that research study initially, but you may be more thoughtful about, I wonder if, and then when you have the opportunity to jump into the water, you might do it. The proverbial optimist here.
I like the thought about, research influencing design. And I know the issue of whether or not it's taught at the university level for people who are, planning to be designers, architects, interiors, engineers, people in all of those design professions. It's happening more than it used to, but when we first started dealing with evidence-based design as a concept, all the practitioners had nothing to do with research in their educational experience, and they were sort of resisted. I think we're moving into a time frame where there's less resistance, but on the other hand, we still are sort of stuck in the design professions. We haven't crossed over into our client world in the same way. So while the question is really about whether or not researchers are focusing too much on publishing, there may be questions about what other people are focusing too much on. Jennifer, do you want to add anything to this one?
Only that, I think researchers need to publish that's their job. I wish we had a little more connection between what are the topics and areas of interest that would benefit more of us. And I will say, I am on the board of the Foundation for Health Environments Research, not because I'm a researcher, but because I'm a practitioner who would like us to do more, would like more research to be done, not necessarily by me. And we went from, and the foundation awards grants to researchers. And several years ago, we moved to the board saying, here's the foundation saying, here's the topic, and trying to solicit researchers instead of saying, give us your research proposals and we'll pick the ones we like most. That resulted in some very good proposals, but it was apples, oranges, strawberries, kiwis. It was really tough, and they didn't even, and as good as they may have been from the practitioner point of view, they weren't necessarily really front and center. So again, I think we have a little bit of a disconnect between what would be really valuable for practitioners, and by practitioners, I really mean owners. I mean, practitioners as the interface to the owner. So that's another little disconnect in my view.
I couldn't agree more with that. I think we also, when we started doing evidence-based design, and I think design research is very broad term, right? If we come back to evidence-based design, we were talking about proving out specific design elements. So in the world of practice, market research is just as important. Site research is just as important. The different levels of contextual inquiry that you need to do to then get to, okay, now I have to make decisions and do cost benefit analysis and what really gets me to the benefit, and I can get to that business case that Ellen's talking about. But the number of studies, I get it, daylight is good. Understood. Do we need another study on daylight? Or do we need another study that says, what are our blind spots or our challenges in getting daylight in? What are the real constraints that real practitioners are facing? I'm 100% in agreement that those are the questions, but what happens is the inquiry about that, which could be at any level. It could be someone heard a comment from facilities and from the operations team. Somebody got feedback in a focus group. Somebody else did a survey. Someone else did really a controlled study. There are levels of evidence, but we don't have a mechanism for respecting all levels and saying, yeah, you just have a glimmer of an idea. That is a future hypothesis for a deep dive.
Sure.
Your insight is as valuable. And I think in keeping the bar too high or too rigid, we have lost out on the learning opportunities that are the fodder for creativity going forward. So that's the agility we need, that mutual respect, saying, practitioners, what are you actually struggling with? When do you actually need to make a decision? When does this need to come in? And what are the questions that, if we could answer, would leapfrog us, and then get to that? And I think that's a very fair comment, that to back and forth hasn't been as fluid. I think both sides want to, but they should never have been two sides to begin with.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't know what this pro-con thing was. I think maybe it's because I'm 100% pro. Mardell gave us another question that I think that runs beautifully into this, and that's who should be responsible for translating the research into practice and design. And I would add a little flavor onto what you just said, Upali, about sort of one-off studies that may or may not be relevant. The question of replication seems important. I know that the academic peer-reviewed papers coming out of universities tend to be unique and something fresh. They are less excited by the idea of, I'm going to duplicate that study and see whether I get the same results. So is there something that we need to better understand in terms of getting the appropriate replication, or in terms of understanding how to translate? I know that evidence exists, and I've always said that it's then the designer's obligation to interpret the implication of that research on their totally unique design situation, because no two actual design projects may have precisely the same interpretation of the same evidence.
Yeah, so Kirk, I think it really speaks to the complexity of healthcare design, and we can't be in silos, and it really gets to the point of having the engaged team, having that interdisciplinary team, and understanding, just because, I'm an architect, just because I think as an architect that this is the right thing to do, I don't necessarily understand how the work actually happens. I don't necessarily understand all of the organizational policies and procedures, the culture, what are the demographics of the patient population, what is the model of care. Yes, we get some of that from the client, but to understand how it all fits together is really hard. And it takes a group of people creating that common understanding to be able to make that interpretation correctly and to have that hypothesis. Well, we think that this is what we're going to get out of making this decision. And, we can talk about replication, which I think is incredibly valuable. You take something like decentralized nursing. I remember there was an evaluation we were doing for conference submissions, and somebody said, oh my goodness, if we have one more presentation about decentralized nursing, I think I'm just going to kill myself. And it's one of those, but we don't have a common understanding of what decentralized nursing is. It looks different in every facility. So you can say, well, I'm going to replicate that study, but what was the model of care? What was the patient demographic? What was the actual design solution? How wide was it? Was there light? Was there not? How close was it to a team state? I mean, there's so many other things to take into account that are important to understand. So we need to be part of a system, and we need to understand that better.
I agree 110% with what you're saying. And and every time we try and do this, every time we bring together clients, architects, engineers, facilities people, everybody around that table, and we're thinking about how we can do research in an area, or we come up with a challenge that we might be benefited from research, we learn something more. And it's the documentation and the sharing of that even if it's incomplete, I think that gets us that one more little bit step closer. It is so complex. There are so many variables. You know, as a clinician, people are always like, well, you're a nurse, you know, and I'm like, I don't know actually, because it's a completely different area than I've ever worked in before. I might know more questions to ask or a little bit more, but it's even complex to them sometimes too, because they're not thinking about the engineering architectural side. But what joy in all of us coming together to take that next step and learn together. I think it's exciting, and I think we're getting there one baby step at a time.
Yeah, is there anything that would lead you to have a bigger step? Because I certainly agree with your baby steps and all the pieces that you're saying about sharing. I guess sharing is really underlies an enormous amount of what is missing.
Yes.
Because there's an awful lot of people doing an awful lot of things, and there's perhaps not quite enough sharing.
I would also add that in addition to that, somewhere along the line, and that was never the intent, we started outsourcing the thinking and the asking of the questions and the answering of the questions to the research team. That's not the intent, right? The questions have to come together. There's an art to asking the questions. Maybe there's a science to asking answerable questions, right? Like not all of those questions can be answered. Yeah, but maybe there's science to that, and the methodology to having a trustable answer to that. Like that's where we come in. But we also over siloed within our teams. We started saying, you think about this, you get this piece, and then I'm going to think about this. And so I think that's one piece that we need to unpack. You asked about giant leaps. I would share that as an example, and I can take no credit for it. This was the health research team within HKS. But one giant leap was when we started doing research training for practitioners. And I think the number we have is like 200 plus practitioners are trained in research methods. And then they get ownership of it. They get the language for it. They are now advocating for it. So the researchers can be more focused on either new frontiers of knowledge or filling the gaps in knowledge that we need. And that is somewhere we don't have enough researchers in the field to put the onus on them. But if we have more of that shared vocabulary that Ellen talked about in terms of how we do research, how we frame questions, how do we get to it, then I think we will make a giant leap.
And I think in the same way that spreading the word across a firm in a large way, the same thing is true about students who are graduating from their universities. If they're in the design profession, they should have been exposed to the notion of research and design research in particular in a way that allows them to either utilize or to participate in being supportive of the notion that they can improve their design decisions through access to credible research.
And I'm going to sort of harken back to something that Jennifer said a little bit earlier. So over the years, when the center has worked with healthcare organizations, I can't tell you the number of times that somebody has said, well, tell me what I should research. It's one of those, I can't tell you what to research. You need to tell me what is important to you as an organization. Otherwise, we're just doing research for research sake, and it's never going to happen. So what are your goals? What are you trying to fix? I mean, anytime somebody is hired to do a project, there's a problem to be solved. And we need to just flip the thinking a little bit and ask some additional questions about, okay, then what's the next problem? What's the next problem? What's the next problem?
And so, Jennifer, you're in a firm. The question of who should be translating the research into practice and design, I'm going to assume maybe that one is pretty easy for you to answer as a practitioner. But is it? Do you really need the support of other disciplines?
I'm sure we do. I just, again, for those of us in smaller firms, it's always a resource capacity, trying to get those things to match up. At the moment, our firm, we've got a gazillion square feet to plan and program. And so we're just stretched really thin. In 5 years, we'll be doing CA and our people will be looking yeah, it's just, it always seems to come at the most inopportune times, no matter what we do. And I do think actually, unlike HKS or some of the larger firms, there's been one generation, sort of mine, that was introduced through Mardell into sort of thinking about research as a basic component of any project. But I'm not sure I and my colleagues have done a very good job pushing that through over the last 10 or 12 years, 15 years to the next generation. So this conversation already has made me realize that that's a failure on my part. Just because I know it doesn't, or think I know it, doesn't mean that the next 35-year-old or 40-year-old for that matter appreciates it the same way. So I think it's this constant, some things have to be constantly retaught and reinvigorated.
Sure.
And it's really easy to have them just kind of dissipate and assume everyone knows how to, every architect was introduced to research, everyone knows how to do it. And it's just not really.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask one more question, but before I do, I'm just going to mention for those who are tuned in, the chat will have your CEU work will be in there soon. And if you've got questions, we're going to open it up to see if we can answer some of your questions after this next question. This one is responding basically to the comment, I guess it was Ellen, you mentioned shared vocabulary. One of the things that is an issue, I presume, is that the metrics that are used by researchers in the environment, and especially health environments, vary pretty widely. Should we have standardized metrics and standardized reporting that would help us in any way?
Well, I'll jump down that rabbit hole. Yes and no. This would be my honest answer. Yes, I think there are some things that we can have some standard metrics on. We all want to know the impact of noise on people. We have standard FGI guidelines that help us, follow some recommendations. There may be things like comfort, thermal comfort. There may be certain things that we could get either perceptual data on or, collect actual live data, like I mentioned about noise. And then I think there's a series of pieces of research in which we look at it from the actual project's perspective. What are the goals and what were the main goals of this XYZ project? And how can we look at metrics? Because each client, each owner may have a different set of metrics that are important to them. And I think it behooves us as people who are helping to inform the client and helping to work with the client about, we're going to do these things to help you improve safety in your behavioral health facility. I think we need to look at how would you measure that? So we talk about metrics of success. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I'll hop in too. So, there was a very well cited study probably about 10 years ago about falls and the cost of falls. And it was done at a system. And when they started doing their modeling for everything, they found that different hospitals within the system were measuring falls in different ways. So you can say that there's a standard, but it might be operationalized differently in different places. And if we think about this sort of like McDonald's, if every hospital were a McDonald's, we would still have different outcomes based upon all of those other complex issues. So yes and no, I'm totally with Terry. Like there's a value to strive to that, but it really requires a very deep understanding of what all of the other variables are. What are the other issues that we need to take into account? Because just because you do it this way here doesn't mean it's going to work the same way over here. So even if you have the same measure, you're not necessarily understanding why the results are different. So again, it's a complex system.
So
Maybe I think to that point, I would add that I do think we need some metrics that we say this is how we measure acoustics. This is how we measure thermal comfort. Like, this is the metric. It gets more problematic when we talk about benchmarks and standards, because it is to the point that Terry and Ellen were making. We do contextual work. It's very important to embrace that our industry is deeply contextual. It is not a product that stays the same product no matter where it goes. It's rooted in site. It's rooted in a certain place. So I do believe that some of that literacy around the measure of success for these things, this is what it looks like. This is the metric. Can we all agree as a profession that this is what our measure of success looks like? It will still be operationalized differently. It will still, the outcome coming from it will probably look different. And I think we're at this very important inflection point where benchmarks and standards and templates are all at risk with the huge change that our industry is going through right now. So that's the piece we also need to navigate, that when does something become a standard? When does that standard get reevaluated? What is the role of guidelines, standards, templates in a fast-moving contextual profession? And that is why I think research will become even more relevant, but has to be agile. It has to be really, really agile.
It still comes back, I think, to interpretation, because the same data can be completely different in another context. I know in my own career, this is many years back now when I was still in practice, but we had two projects for the same system. So it was exactly the same client, and they were pumped up about us doing an evidence-based project, and both projects were for maternity care. And it turned out that one was in a Hispanic area that absolutely wanted to have and theoretically needed to have a traditional process, and the other was in an upscale suburban area that wanted to have LDRP. And you know, our client was totally frustrated that, well, wait a minute, the same evidence is telling us something different on these two projects, and it's, you know, it's the almost the same project. So interpretation of whatever you have becomes terribly important. But I think your language of these are complex building types, and they are extremely contextual in the sense that the context can vary your interpretation of the same evidence. Fascinating stuff. I got one question here on the chat, is that everybody mentions Roger Ulrich's research, but can the panel recommend more recent sources for evidence-based design? Is it even possible to do research into evidence-based design for healthcare because one never has a control group to evaluate any particular initiative against? So the control question is an important one. We almost always are doing studies where you try it and you measure the outcome. And yes, you cannot control against somebody having built a similar building and done something totally different in it. That's just financially not reasonable. But that doesn't mean that the outcomes aren't valuable and useful research. In terms of the recent sources, the Ulrich group has done a second study. The original was in 2008. There was a second edition, and there is now another that has been produced in Sweden that are essentially collections of research that people can go to. But my suggestion would be get a graduate student in your firm and let them research any topic that you would like, go directly to the literature and deal with whatever's most current. Anybody else want to comment on that one?
I definitely do. So I had just put in the chat, the Center for Health Design has the knowledge repository, which is put together through a series of partners that have supported this for more than a decade. So the Academy of Architecture for Health, FGI, ACHA, NIHD have all been incredibly influential in helping us pull together literally on a weekly basis the new papers that are available. And there's lots of ways that you can filter it. The coolest thing that I think we did in the last couple of years is to have this little cold gold lock icon, and you can filter to those papers that are actually open access. So everybody complains that I can't get behind the paywall, but more and more research is being made open access, either through the grant funding requirements or through open access publication. So that is definitely an option. And Kirk, I know you will be an advocate for the level that we have risen to now allows us to do literature reviews and systematic reviews. And instead of culling through every single study on X topic, find a literature review on that topic and it will summarize the information for you. And the center creates issue briefs. We have interactive design diagrams. We do lots to try and help people understand the research in a more practical way. So I'm going to put in a plug for healthdesign.org because I think, explore. And if you have questions, I think any of us would be happy to help.
And if I could jump in here, those literature reviews are the most valuable thing on earth to me, because it's the short step or the shortcut for someone like me. And I just want to tell a little story again, because I'm on the foundation board. Several years ago, and I hope I'm allowed to say this, but we had the Tim Tussler Prize, an annual award for the best research, and one of the and there were, I don't know, 10 submissions, and one of them was a literature review. And my initial reaction was, hell no, that's not real research. That's somebody compiling stuff. Boy, was I wrong. That has been the most valuable. Vertebra is the name. Teva, however you pronounce your name. If you care about ICU design, which I hope if you're an architect doing ICUs, you do. It is the most valuable. The one document, if Kirk, you ask, what is the one research study you use the most? I would say that one. And it's beautiful. It's like 30, it's just great. I can quickly scan through all the documents that are out there. Which ones are important to me, because it's subdivided by category, landscape, family, a bunch of other stuff. And I don't have to read them all. I just have to read that document to look at 5 articles that I want to read for this project and another 7 for that project. So my plea would be to the graduate programs, have every student do one of these research reviews and then publish that for the rest of us. That would be a great bridge from practice, those learning research, and everyone would benefit.
Great suggestion,
Mainly
Jennifer.
me.
Fabulous suggestion. Ellen, you led a group that made a presentation recently about the Herd Journal's publication of systematic reviews, literature reviews, and a variety of terms that appeared to overlap. Do you want to comment on the literature review?
I am trying to remember which one you're talking about. We did the case studies where there was overlap in the terms, but the literature review issue, so there are narrative reviews, there are systematic reviews, there are scoping reviews, and they're done in different ways depending upon how much information is available and how deep a dive somebody wants to take. An important aspect of a literature review, hopefully the better ones, not all of them have this, but the better ones will have some type of a critical appraisal that happens of all of the papers that are being included in that review. So a lot of times, the more you have a topic studied, the more diversity of results you'll get. And that goes to Polly's point about being so contextual. But there's also the issue of quality. Some studies, you can have the same methods. Some are done better than others. And if there is a control, sometimes there is actually a control arm. If there's a control, if there's not, how equal were the populations? There's all sorts of issues that come into evaluating how well the study was done separate from the study design itself. So these are all things just to have a basic understanding of what's important in research. And when you're looking even at a literature review to help understand, these are some of the things that I'm looking for in the literature review to have confidence in what it's actually saying. So It's an amazing process for all of us interested in research. We could geek on this forever.
Absolutely. And to Jennifer's point, I love the endorsement that this was useful for me because of these reasons. What would be really useful for the research community is knowing how you used it, what decisions you did differently. I'm so curious. Did you design something differently because that research was available, or did it just verify your gut? And that feedback back on, didn't think of doing it this way, did it differently, that would be so critical. That feedback loop is also something we don't have often. I also love the comment that came right now, and that was where I was going to Tava's original question. We do have to really question the image that comes to our head when we hear research. It is not all randomized control trials. In
Yeah.
practice,
Yeah.
RCTs are not always possible. You need enough of practice-based insights to say, okay, now I have a testable hypothesis that can go into a really controlled trial, but maybe we don't need it. Like, what's
Yeah.
the question? What's the insight you need? What's the right methodology? And there's a lot of scalability. Sometimes a lit review is the right research method. Sometimes it is the focus groups methodically connected, or surveys that are really deployed with validated measures. So bringing method to that is what research and practice, or that bridge to practice, really is about. And I also really appreciate the connotations, like we do work with certain cultural norms and certain groups where there are connotations to, hey, I'm going to study you. That is not the intention of the research. The research is always intended, I want to be better, so I want to be more intentional, so I want to ask the questions, and I want to investigate them in the most responsible way and most rigorous way possible. And I think part of our challenge, why have we not been making giant leaps, is maybe we've put the bar too high and too rigid, that only randomized controlled trials in a very complex system with many confounding variables are acceptable.
I agree with Polly, and I just want to make the comment that something that comes up when people ask me about that is, this is social science research that we're engaged with. And so it lends itself to very complex systems we're studying. Even within a hospital, let me just give you a great example, which all of you know to be true. There are so many different cultures and systems that exist within a hospital. It's hard to level set all of, like, even the staff have different cultures. So we just have to remember who and what we're doing and what the goal is. What is it for? What is the end result? What is the question that came up? What is the design intervention that somebody said, we're going to do same-handed rooms? Does that work? It behooves us then to say, I don't know, but let's find out, right? And that's the research. That's as simple and as complex as it can be at the same time. That's the part of this I really love.
So we're rapidly running out of time. I want to have one more comment from the audience. Selma Martinez has asked, what's experience on research that's collaborative with clients and users, that begins with non-invasive approaches or methodologies that can be introductory for clients who may not have the depth of evidence-based design knowledge, for example? Anybody want to tackle that one?
Look, I think I saw Mardell's response to that question on the chat, and I could just +1 it.
Okay, that's further down than I was scrolling.
So, I do think that getting beyond just manipulating what we know and making that shift to the next amazing thing, we don't have enough conversations about that. We get mired in proving. So we talk about rationalization, but we get trapped by post-rationalization. I did this. It was a good thing. Let me prove how good it was. Let me show everybody in my community how smart I was. Not the purpose of research. So if we want to go beyond manipulating what we know to making the jump to that next amazing thing, we just take Terry's words to heart. What is it that we want to achieve? What do we know? What do we not know? Let's find out together. And the method in the finding out is the research. The actions from the finding out is the design.
And if I could just jump in one more time, it seems to me that we are on the precipice. That sounds so negative, but we are on the edge of a tremendous shifts in how care is delivered through automation, robotics, and AI. And there's not enough built out there right now for there to really be a ton of research. I mean, there's just it's so in its infancy. But that to me says we should be really thinking about the hypotheses. Right, we should be the hypotheses now, figure out who can take it on. And I don't think it's necessarily that big a pot of things, but let's go back to decentralized nursing. When can cameras and other systems, I don't want to say replace a nurse, but supplement nursing? And when is it not successful or less successful? But we're just on the edge of things really, really, really changing. And it's far more interesting than where we put that patient toilet, which actually we still don't have a lot of what I call true research on.
No, we don't.
It's mainly, if you go back and look at that, it's 95% of that is architects doing simulation. And I mean, no, that's a good thing to do, but that to me is not research. That's a bunch of that's almost anecdotal. So even when we think we know things, sometimes when you dig into what's really out there, there's not what you think there is. I would have thought that was bedrock, and it's quicksand.
So I'm
Big-handed
afraid
worms.
I am obligated to make some sort of closing remarks, and I just want to thank everybody on the panel. I think, Ellen, your focus on the rational and the business case is terribly important. Your role with the center has been tremendous. We are delighted to have you as an editor at Herd. Upali, your contributions have been enormous. And I think what you said at the beginning, we now have less than we need in terms of what has been produced. That's a powerful, powerful thing. And I thought your observation that there hasn't been much difference in the artifacts. The buildings that we're producing don't really look radically different. That's a fascinating one. I had not given any thought to that. And Terry, you focus so powerfully on process and the concept of research in design as opposed to research being pulled into design, but research being done by designers and their colleagues and so forth. Terribly helpful. And Jennifer, bless your heart, you can't find the research. I think you are clearly one of the most respected practitioners who I believe exemplifies the notion of an evidence-based practitioner. And yet you so clearly explain how difficult that is. It's not easy because what we have done as a field has not really given you the tools that you need to be as effective as you possibly can. And you, I think, tasked us to let the client world select the important topics of research rather than allowing academics to just simply willy-nilly pick whatever they think is easy. For me, the takeaway from today is to just recognize how important design research is, especially in the field of design for health, and that we really are dealing with an extraordinarily complex arena in which no single answer is ever available because almost everything is somehow dealing with contextual work. So even though it's complex, even though it's contextual, I still think we can improve design decisions by referring to credible, relevant evidence. I believe that so firmly that I have no reason to pick a pro or a con. That's just the way it is. In spite of that, I have more recently also figured out that a lot of intuitive work can also lead to best practice in the same way that evidence-based work can lead to best practice. And we know that the vast majority of decisions on any project are based on best practice rather than pure evidence. So thank you. And I think it's back to Mardell for a closing comment.
I just like to thank everyone taking taking time out of their busy schedules to engage in this conversation. And it's for a love of what we've sort of carved out in the future of healthcare design that we are continuing to do this. And I'd like to thank the audience for joining us in this space and appreciate your comments. I don't know if anyone from ACHA wants to step in now to say goodbye, but if not, then we wish you all a beautiful evening or afternoon, wherever you are, and charge on as design researchers and thought provokers. Good evening, good afternoon.